Hi friends, welcome back to our See the Light, Yes You Can Draw Club. This is Club Meeting 28. I'm Pat Nepley, I'm your master artist. I hope you've been joining me through all of these club meetings. I have a very special meeting planned for you today. Last time we were together we talked about landscapes and what techniques you need to use for aerial perspective to make sure you create depth in your landscape. We're going to continue that work today, so let's review what you need for today's lesson. Couple sheets of paper, not too big, a standard pencil, an eraser, and the largest box of crayons you have handy. I just like a lot of options when it comes to color. So you remember that the last time we were together we did a landscape and we talked about the difference between a landscape and a seascape or even a cityscape, but they're all outdoor scenes. And we talked about aerial perspective. Not the kind of perspective with a ruler, like linear perspective, but the tricks you use to help the viewer who's looking at your artwork understand how deep, how much space your landscape takes up. And we looked at some amazing landscape paintings. Well, here's one I really want you to see. It's by the American artist George Inness. It's called Early Morning. Now, Inness uses all of the rules that we learned last time, plus a new rule that we're going to learn for color. And that's that colors in the distance are lighter and more muted. That means it's less intense color, has some gray in it. Can you see how the trees in the background in Inness's painting are grayer? Here's another painting by our friend Albert Bierstadt. We looked at several of his landscapes last time we were together, and I just love this painting. It's called Rocky Mountain Landers Peak. Wow, look at this painting. I love it for so many reasons. It has a focal point. That means something that your eye is drawn to right away. It's that waterfall in the center foreground. And look at those majestic mountains, like they could reach right up to heaven. You'll notice, though, that the colors are muted and much paler. Now, our landscape will be much smaller than our friend Albert Bierstadt's. That Rocky Mountain painting is 10 feet by 6 feet. That is a grand landscape. But for today, we're just going to be doing a smaller landscape because working with color takes a lot of time, and you'll need some practice to put our rules into place. So let's review what are the rules of aerial landscape. First, objects that are in the front appear larger than objects that are further away. The second rule of aerial landscape is lines in the front, in the foreground, are bolder and darker than lines that are receded into the distance. Do you remember when we drew the pine trees? And our third rule of aerial landscape was that you can see detail when it's up front and close to you, but as objects get further away, they're more fuzzy and less detail is seen. And of course, now our fourth rule that applies to color. And that's why I want you to have a lot of options for color. The rule is that colors in the distance are muted and less intense and lighter. So let's get started on our landscape, and we're going to put all four rules into practice. Now, the last time we were together, we had a very simple landscape. So what we're going to do is use that same roadmap. We're going to use the same elements in our landscape. And we're going to start off with a pencil, not our crayons right away. We're going to do what's called an underdrawing. And that's so that we know exactly where we're going to put things, our composition. And we can change it while it's still pencil, but we can't once it's crayon. So, like every other drawing we've done in our perspective series, we always start with our horizon line. And so the horizon line for this is going to be not really straight, but a little wavy, okay? Because the ground isn't always perfectly flat. You recall that we had some mountains. So again, keep your pencil lines light, and remember that it's not upside down V's, but it's a jagged shape, and you can make actually several layers of mountains. We could even keep going. In the foreground, we had a nice pine tree. So I'm just going to draw some light lines so that I know where I'm going to place my pine tree. I'm not going to worry too much about the branches of the pine tree. I can create a few little light lines. I'm going to mostly do that with my crayon. And you recall we had a trail that went all the way to the horizon line, and it started to look like it disappeared, and the trail went right by our large tree. So because it's wider, larger in the foreground, and then as it recedes into the distance, it gets smaller. You recall we also had some pine trees that were in our middle ground. So I'm just going to put some basic lines where they are, and off in the distance where the road kind of went towards the horizon line, we had a stand of pine trees back there. So once you have your basic elements, notice I didn't put in a lot of detail. I just used my pencil to kind of sketch out my composition. This is called an underdrawing. Now obviously I could keep going with pencil to make it a full complete pencil drawing, but for working in color you want to spend as much of your time using your tool for your color, and today it's crayons, rather than your pencil. So I'm pretty happy with my placement, so now I'm going to move on to the color. Now here's a rule for when you're working on landscapes in color. You always start with lighter first, moving to darker, and you start with background first, moving to foreground. So the furthest thing in the background is the sky, and that's probably going to be the lightest as well. So pick a shade that you want to use. Light blue is probably pretty standard to use. You can use any shade of light blue that you like. And you're going to hold your crayon in the overhand grip. Now, I have a tree here that goes right up into the sky, but I am actually going to shade right over it, friends, because I will be able to see my pencil lines peeking through. Why don't I stop where the tree is? A couple of reasons. It's really hard to go around branches with a sky when you want the sky to look nice and solid. Also, I haven't put in my detail of my pine branches yet, so I don't know exactly where they are. So you're going to fill in your whole sky first. Now our rule of thumb is stay lighter. You can always get darker, but you can't do the opposite. If you press too hard, you can't make it lighter. So I'm going to put in a very light layer of blue right up to my mountains. I'm going to look at it. I don't think that's blue enough. So I can go back in and do another layer. Now another rule of thumb with landscapes, especially when you're doing the sky, is that as you get towards the mountain or the horizon line, you're going to make it a little more intense color than further up in the sky. So as I do my sky area, as I get further down, I'm going to put in a little more pressure. Just a little more pressure. Now you'll notice I'm not being super careful, because I can do that. I can fix that edge when I go to do my mountains. Okay. Again, we're going to work from background to foreground, from less detail to more detail, from lighter to darker. That's how you work. And that applies whether you're using color pencil, crayon, or even when we go to our pastels later on in some future club meetings. Now what about our mountains? Well, we know by our aerial perspective rule they should be duller and lighter. When you're trying to make a color duller, you add gray. So I'm going to grab two crayons. I'm going to grab a gray and kind of a purplish color. When mountains are seen in the distance, they appear to be purple. That's not always true. If it's a heavily grass-covered mountain, it'll look different. But we're going to take gray, and both of those mountains, notice I'm going right over the pencil line where I drew in my tall pine tree. And I'm going to make this whole area gray. Now you see how quickly I'm coloring? I'm going very fast, trying to keep my lines nice and even. There isn't a part that's really darker than the other. I'm just trying to get a layer of color on as quick as I can. So you should be doing that too. Now by adding this gray, it's going to make the color duller. So now that I have the gray, I'm going to go back over with this purplish color. Now this mountain range is behind this one, so this will be lighter. Colors, as they recede in the distance, get lighter and duller. As I move to the foreground, they get more intense. Now you can make your edges a little easier to see, like that. So because this mountain is in front of the smaller, further one, we can make the color just a little more intense and a little darker. And so that's what we'll do. So again, by increasing your pressure, you can make it darker. We're still not doing our total dark. You're still not giving it all the pressure you can, because it is in the background, and that means colors are lighter. Now, of course, not every mountain is just one solid color. Sometimes there's texture. Sometimes there's snow on the top if it's a snow-capped mountain. Sometimes there's rocky crags. But you're not going to see as much detail way further back in that mountain as you would on something that's up close. So I'm going to quickly cover this in with some purple over the gray. The gray makes it duller. I can still see my underdrawing in pencil where I've placed my trees that are in the middle ground that kind of rise up over that background. And you'll notice the color's not quite as even because it's kind of showing that there's some rockier, craggier places. Now, once you're happy with your color, now maybe you've chosen to do your mountain a shade of brown or a shade of green. Maybe you didn't want to do it purple. Still remember the rules. Further away is lighter than something that's up closer. And we're just going to continue that. Now we want to work on this field that comes from the middle ground to the foreground. So in order to do that, I'm still going to use color, but my change in my pressure is going to make the color get darker as it comes right to the front, because colors are more intense when they're closer, and as they recede, they get duller or lighter. But since a field is rarely just a solid, like a carpet green, I'm going to get several different shades of green for my field. I want something that's kind of olivey green. So that's why you should always have several crayons handy. Now, if you start off light, you're better. So I'm going to use kind of a lighter yellowish green. I'm not going to go over my road too much, but I can go over the trees. Keep it light. I'm actually going to do the whole area all the way to the front. Even though I know the front will eventually be darker, I can do that by layering. Notice I'm not worried about how neat I'm doing it because I'm going to add in so many layers of texture. So I'm laying down a nice light layer of like a yellowish green. And I can go through my tall pine tree branch since that's going to be dark brown. Now I need to have the color get darker and with more texture detail as it comes forward. So I'm going to add in some other shades of green and apply a little more pressure as I come to the front. Now, why am I not worried about how neat I am coloring this in? Because this is supposed to be a field, which means it has texture. And texture is created by making various types of marks. We learned that in our club meeting on texture. So I can leave some space in between, show the different shades of green. I just want to remember that I get lighter as I go back. And more pressure as I come to the front. Now I'm going to use this kind of goldish color. And where my path comes in, very, very light, this goldish color, very, very light on my path. Now I want to try and match. If it's really light back here with my field, it'll be light with my path, and both will kind of get darker at the same rate. Now my path is it's not laid down concrete, it's just a worn path, so I'm not worried about being super neat because I'm trying to show some texture. That's still not dark enough up front. So let's get another green, and I'm giving much more pressure. Difference is now I'm going to actually add some texture. Change to your basic grip from your overhand grip, and along the edge of the road in the front here, actually make little blades of grass kind of coming up near the road, the bottom of the tree, on the edges here. You only see detail in the foreground. We learned that last time, remember, when we talked about the rules of perspective? That you see detail when it's close to you and up front, but as you move further away, you don't see as much detail. We're not going to draw any blades of grass back here where the road is so far away. We wouldn't see that detail. But we will see it when it's up front and close. Now I can create some more look of texture by how I make my marks with my crayon without even making individual blades of grass. And I just want to get lighter as I go back. Now for the road, we did a little light layer of gold, but there's probably lots of different layers and colors of brown in the road. And because this is in the foreground and I'll see texture, I might see some rocks or some bumps. So use your different crayons and experiment with the colors to get just the effect that you like. But you'll notice it's much lighter as it goes back. Now we could spend a lot of time just on the road itself, adding in more pebbles, more detail, ruts in the road, the detail and texture you would see in the front. But I want to move on to our tree before we run out of time. Anything that's in the foreground is going to be darker, more intense color, larger, and you're going to get to see the detailed texture. So what I want to do is I want to get the bulk of my bark and my trunk of my tree. And this is where I really am going to press the hardest. Now you remember from our texture lesson we learned that you don't just, when you're trying to show texture, you don't just shade in something solid, you use a variety of marks. So I'm making long, stripy type marks to show the bark texture. First I start with a lighterish brown crayon and I leave space in between. Then I come back with a darker brown crayon and do the same thing, and it creates the illusion of bark. Now I'm not going to go all the way up yet. First I want to put in some branches, then I'll go back in and put in some little bits of trunk that peek through. So set aside your brown crayons and try and find the darkest green in your set that you can find. And here, because it's in the foreground, even though it extends way up into the sky, we're going to do our textured pine branches. And remember, we learned that a pine tree kind of droops down and it's somewhat triangular, but it's not an actual triangle shape. And it's okay that sky peeks through and mountain peeks through because that's what it would really be like. So here's our tall pine tree. I'm making kind of these droopy, shaggy marks. Now I'm going to go back with my browns because I will see some trunk through there, maybe a little bit here, and you're going to keep it right in line with the trunk, but you're going to get skinnier as you get up top. And a little bit of that trunk is showing through. Can you see it? Now for my trees that are in my middle ground, to help show my perspective that the landscape is deep and moving back, I'll make those same trees, but I'll make them smaller, and the color will not be quite as dark. And you won't see nearly as much detail in the trunk as you do in our tree that's nice and close. So just a few quick lines for the trunk rather than all that time we spent there. And I'll still use the same crayon, but I won't press quite as hard to make our branches. And this one is a little bit smaller. I won't see a lot of detail because it's too far away. I might see a little bit of the trunk through there, just a few dashes. And so you can see you can achieve perspective with color. It just takes some time. In fact, I could spend a lot more time on this drawing, making the dark to light more solid, making sure that the sky is the color I like. And if I wanted to put clouds in, I could even use a white crayon or go back in with my blue and make the areas where there isn't a cloud even richer. You can make the landscape what works for you. In fact, you can even add more elements, perhaps some more trees, more rocks, an animal if you want to add it. The whole idea is to remember the rules for aerial perspective. So let's review them one more time. The first rule, an object that is closer appears larger than objects that are further away. The second rule, you use bold, dark lines in the foreground and lighter, finer lines in the background. The third rule is that detail is seen when it's up close, like texture, but the further away it is, the less detail you'll be able to see. It gets fuzzier. And our color rule of aerial perspective is that colors are lighter and more muted the further they are away from you. Have you ever taken a drive with your family and you see lots of rolling hills? Take a look and see if you remember this rule. As you see each layer of hills ahead of you, the ones that are further away will be lighter and fuzzier. And it's fun to get closer and closer on the ride as you see the hills come into view. There's a great verse I want to share with you about hills. It's in Psalms, probably one of my favorite books. The Bible is so rich with visual imagery, pictures that you can see in your head. This is Psalm 147, verse 8. He covers the sky with clouds. He supplies the earth with rain and makes grass grow on the hills. That's a great reminder that this entire world, every landscape you see, was created by God. He gave us those hills and the wonderful sky and all the things that we see outside our window that we can draw. So I hope when you see a landscape, you think of God and how He created it and you thank Him for it. Because as an artist, you get so much to enjoy in this world that you can use in your art. Well, I'm glad you were with me today, my friends, but it's time to sign off. Before we meet again, I hope you spend some more time working with different color tools to make a landscape, remembering our rules. See you next time.